Welcome to empowerME Conversations, a podcast from the Atlantic Council. This show brings you leaders from business and government shaping the future of Middle East economies. I'm your host, Amjad Ahmad, Chairman of the empowerME Initiative. Let's get started. Spanning 3 continents, the MENA region has a large and highly diverse population of 480 million people. It comprises countries across the wealth spectrum, from the poorest Yemen to the richest Qatar. It boasts one of the world's youngest and fastest growing population, is endowed with rich and natural resources, and has 4 of the top 10 sovereign wealth funds with combined assets of $2.5 trillion. At the same time, MENA is facing a challenging global and regional environment which has been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, global economic slowdown, rising inflation, and unstable geopolitical conditions. Amidst these challenges, the variation in GDP annual growth rate across MENA countries has been significant. For example, the projected GDP growth rate in Morocco and Tunisia in 2022 averages around 3% versus 4 to 5.5% in Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq, and 8% in Saudi Arabia. Overall, higher oil and gas prices and increased production benefited the energy exporters, while increased inflation negatively affected oil, gas, and food importers. It's a great pleasure to have with us today Jihad Azour, Director of the Middle East and Central Asia regions at the International Monetary Fund, to discuss the opportunities and challenges in the MENA region. He formerly served as Lebanon's finance minister, and he has held various positions in the private sector, including senior roles in McKinsey and Booz & Co. Welcome, Jihad.
Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure having you. Thank you for joining us. I'm also joined today by my co-host and colleague, Racha Helwa, empowerME Director at the Atlantic Council. Racha is a senior economist with 25 years of professional experience in economic and financial policy analysis and implementation. She held multiple roles in government, academia, and the private sector. Welcome, Racha. Thanks for joining us as well.
Thank you, Amjad. Happy to be here with you. Hi, Jihad. Very pleased to be with you today.
Jihad, let's lay the scene for the audience. In a few words, when you see the structural opportunities and challenges in the region, what do you see today from your perspective? And more importantly, how do you compare it to other regions in the world?
Again, Amjad, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you and with Rasha. You laid it very well in your opening remarks. The region is very diverse, and therefore, the region is not one group. It's a multiple groups in the same geography. Of course, the current global and regional developments are putting the region in one of those moments where several issues need to be addressed at once. Of course, we live in a situation where uncertainty is growing. We live in a situation where global developments are having direct impact on the region. And also we live in a region where certain number of the challenges that were with us over the last couple of decades are still very present. Globally, the global outlook has moved from being promising to challenging. Inflation is on the rise. Global value chain has been affected by the disruption in supply and supply chains. The management of the post-COVID is still an issue that several countries are facing. At the same time, the war in Ukraine has also raised certain number of challenges, from food security issues to disruption in supply of some of the important commodities. This has also led to increase in uncertainty over a certain number of key issues that are very important to the region, like energy supply, energy security. At the same time, the normalization of monetary policy by large economies because of inflation has affected countries in the region, especially those who are very much dependent on capital flows to finance their debt, as well as also their current account. situation. Therefore, we're at a moment where all these issues are at play. It's a very dynamic situation. Countries are faring with those challenges in a fairly different way. Of course, this is one of the moments where the region is split between oil exporters and oil importers who are faced with different outlooks, and they have to deal with a certain number of divergent challenges. And therefore, it's a very fascinating moment for the region. It's also fascinating because the long-term challenges or opportunities are also present today. How we deal with climate transformation, how we deal with the acceleration of certain trends like technology, how we get benefit of all these transformation for a region that is very young, and that is also the role of youth and women could be a potential game changer for the future, but also if they're not addressed well, could be the curse that the region will face over the next decade.
Thank you, Jihad, for highlighting the global outlook and the regional outlook very precisely. And I'd like to take the discussion one step back and think of the structural problems that the region, at least the middle income countries in the region, are faced with for the longest time. So I'm thinking more of like Egypt, Jordan, more of North Africa. I'd also think of Morocco, Tunisia, Lebanon. Of course, it's been getting worse with the financial crisis, but the structure of these economies has always been struggling with the lack of fiscal space and hence the inability to spend on infrastructure, on education, on healthcare, while the population is growing much faster than economic growth is speeding up. So, like, how do you reconcile this dilemma? I think they've been doing the structural reforms over the past, I don't know, 20 plus years, but they're still struggling with the same problem.
Well, indeed, you are, Russia, raising a very important issue for the region. It's the field that a lot of things have been changing, but yet still things are, or the issues are still the same. And this goes back to I would say, the speed of reform and the depth of reform. When you do too little too late, you cannot get the expected outcome. And things also are dynamic. First, you have the demographic dynamics. That is one of the, I would say, most pressing dynamics in the region. The climate dynamics, and if we look back over the last 2-3 decades, we see a rapid deterioration of climate conditions that are adding to the challenges that countries are facing. And also you have the geopolitical dynamic that hasn't been favorable to countries in the region. What one would say is the resilience is still there and providing countries with some buffers over the last few decades, except maybe during COVID, where maybe informality that helped in the past did not really help because the nature of the shock affected most those who were on the edge of informality. And this is one of the key lessons learned. We issued recently a report that is showing that informality that played in the past as a buffer did not play well this time. Therefore, I think we need to put in context that the speed of reform and the depth of reform have to be well calibrated in order to address or to overcome issues. Second, I think there are certain structural issues that need to be addressed. I think the role of women and youth is a game changer. If they're not put into the contribution, they could become an issue. But I think what we need to think, and this is what I very much think, that their contribution could be a game changer. If only we can reduce by half the gap compared to other emerging economies in terms of women's participation, there is $1 trillion of additional output that can be created. If we can gradually increase access to opportunities, access to market, to new talents, we can create additional growth structurally by 1 to 1.5% over the next 5 to 10 years, which will provide job opportunities to many of the young people coming into the labor market. If we can reduce the gap that exists in terms of infrastructure, this is also something that would provide additional opportunities. Last but not the least, if we can rethink regional cooperation by developing new avenues of complementarity between countries by opening up certain sectors, this is in itself will not only strengthen regional integration, but also will create additional opportunities for jobs and for markets. Therefore, those are important issues. Last but not the least, the state, the way the state functions and the way the state thinks, the role of its role is very important. A state as an enabler is much, in the long run, more important or much more important than a state as an operator. Therefore, all these issues were with us and are still with us. We are at crossroad, yes. I think COVID provided us with also silver linings, that technology was put at use to help countries address some of those issues. What we are seeing today as transformative challenges that we need to address in terms of addressing climate issues and use the climate transformation as an opportunity for the region. All those elements, I think and I hope, will help us plan and charter a better future for the population of the region.
Jihad, you mentioned several interesting reforms that we focus very heavily on. And just to focus a little bit on the role of government and providing that space for the private sector, we're seeing certain countries enact some of these reforms. In your opinion, where do you see pockets of positive change in terms of reforms? And what more do you think needs to be done to create the right space for the private sector to flourish in the region?
Let me give you examples. One example is what we saw in the GCC, for example, during the last 2-3 years. We saw good reforms on the labor market side that allowed additional labor mobility, especially for the expats, which help increase productivity, provide additional space for women to contribute into the economy, which also has helped to create new job opportunities in the Gulf, and also improve the competitiveness of the economies. We saw also that during this COVID crisis, new forms and ways of providing social assistance helped bridge the gap, especially for those who are in informality. We saw this in Morocco, where more than 5 million families were provided with support. We saw this in Jordan. We saw this in Egypt. Those are good opportunities that need to be expanded and shift a bit the way their state provides support through targeted and direct support instead of untargeted subsidies or public employment that usually reduce the level of productivity. I think there are avenues of further reform on the SOE side and also on the role, for example, in the Gulf of sovereign wealth funds to provide more opportunities than, I would say, occupying the economic territory. On the other hand, there are certain avenues of progress that can be expanded. Access to finance. The region doesn't lack resources, financial resources, and has a good set of financial systems. Yet, access to finance is very limited compared to other emerging economies or comparable economies, especially for the youth and for women and for the entrepreneurs. Because when we think private sector is very diverse. It has large corporations, but also it has startups. And the region has a very vibrant young population that can accelerate growth and economic transformation. Therefore, we need to provide access to finance to those. This is one example, and I can repeat many of those. I think what is needed today is to rethink the role of the state from an operator to an enabler.
Correct.
Accelerate, when it's possible, certain regional standards, from payment to technology to ease of access of goods and services. This will expand the market. I give you a small example. We did a study 3 years ago that showed, but only by reducing, for example, some of the barriers that exist between Maghreb countries, you could have a market of 100 million consumers that can create additional jobs for the population of the region and growth that can exceed 1% to 1.5% for the next 5 years. This is only by reducing barriers. Therefore, removing barriers, creating new, I would say, dynamic between what the state can provide and what the private sector and the entrepreneur community can provide. This in itself, it's a very good booster for growth and job creation.
Well, one country that gets a lot of criticism for not providing enough space is Egypt. Where do you see Egypt in terms of its involvement in the economy, and do you see that changing? Do you see that there are reforms in the horizon to allow more private sector development?
Well, first of all, Egypt did reforms over the last 5 years, both on the economic side, on the public finance side, as well as also on the social side. They moved from untargeted subsidy to more targeted support through various programs, Takaful and Karama and others, that have helped ease the pressure, but also improve living conditions for millions of people. Egypt also, through those reforms, was able to grow at rates of 5.5%, 6%. And this is despite the COVID crisis. We need to recognize that. Egypt also is a large market. It's an economy of 110 million people, very vibrant, talented with a young population that is very innovative too. Therefore, the potential of Egypt growing is there. The potential of Egypt becoming an important player, not only in the Middle East, but also in Africa, is definitely still with us. What needs to be done? To strengthen stability and addressing issues of inflation, which is an important issue globally, but also for Egypt too. Maintain public finance under control, which I think this is what the authorities are doing, and provide predictability in terms of flow of capital, flow of goods. And those are important issues. In addition to that, accelerating structural reforms by providing predictability in terms of investment opportunities, leveling the playing field with the private sector, redesign the role of the state to be more on the enabling side. Those are reforms that will definitely translate into jobs, translate into growth, and also translate into improving living conditions, especially for those who are living in the rural area. Therefore, I think Egypt has done important things to consolidate, to stabilize the economy, as well as also improve financing conditions. Going forward, I see innovation, especially in climate. Egypt is going to host the COP27. I see improvement in the business and investment conditions. And I see also the state becoming more an enabler and less as an operator.
So, Jihad, you mentioned climate, and this is a very important factor for developing countries largely, but also for the region. The region so far possesses about 25% of the solar energy globally, which could suffice the global demand, like if well explored. So what would be your advice here? How would they benefit the most from this potential? How can they be competitive in the international market, export these resources, store and export renewable energy maybe to Africa, to Europe? And how can institutions like the IMF and World Bank help them doing so?
Russia, this is a strategic issue. I think we all now recognize that climate is not only only, I would say, a public good, but also something that is relevant in our day-to-day life. It's relevant for agriculture and those who are living in the rural area. It's very relevant for those who in need of water. And it's also very relevant for the health conditions of our population because of risks that pollution will, impact our life as well as also our health. Therefore, it's very important to take climate issues seriously, improve our climate investment in order to increase renewable energy sources, especially that we can use wind, we can use the sun, solar panels can be expanded and reduce our dependence on fossil fuel energy. We can share better very scarce water resources, and we can protect our economies from, or our society from, climate risks. Therefore, it's definitely an important avenue for us in terms of investment, in terms of also improving the conditions for our populations. And this is where the role of international organizations is important here, by providing not only financing, but also by providing, I would say, roadmaps that could also help others, especially the private sector, which is going to be the largest contributor in terms of investment, to see that international organizations have a skin in the game. And this is what the fund is trying to do with the new facility, the resilience facility that we have got the agreement of the board, and that during the annual meetings we will put it into operations, by also providing a roadmap on what are the policies that countries could put at play in order to improve climate conditions, reduce dependence on fossil fuel, and have the right pricing of carbon. Three is to, I would say, create synergies between what the region is doing and what other parts of the world are also doing. In the region, we have some success stories. For example, the largest producer of renewable energy is Masdar, company from UAE, that has expanded globally. Therefore, we have also a certain number of success stories that we want to promote. This year and next year, the two COPs will be taking place in the region. Those are important moments. I hope that will give the opportunity to the region to showcase what we can produce here in terms of innovation, and also raise awareness of the global community of the challenges that our countries are facing. And, above all, that our vulnerable population is facing.
Who do you think would be best to lead this sector? Is it more the private sector to lead renewables? Is it more the private sector? Is it the government? Is it both? Do we need to think more about PPP projects, BOT projects? Like, how do we envisage the financial infrastructure in this sector, particularly in the countries where there's lack of resources? So, like middle income MENA countries, excluding the Gulf.
Russia, I think the right equation is to have all stakeholders working together. Each has comparative advantages. The private sector knows how to invest and where to find opportunities. In certain cases, the risk is high, and therefore we need to have the contribution or the input from multilateral institutions to open, I would say, the door for the private sector to come in. Civil society also has an important role to play, because we need to change behavior. And the state has to regulate, has to provide the right framework for all these actors to come into play. It's a long journey. I think it would require more than one phase. And there will be some priorities in the short term, which is how to strengthen the adaptation to climate change, because we need to protect lives and livelihoods. But I think over the medium term, the mitigation will come in, will require additional investment. And hopefully, we will create an ecosystem whereby energy security and energy transformation will go hand in hand. I think what we are seeing today, that the two priorities should be reconciled. We need energy and we need to secure energy, but also we need gradually to move into a wider range of cleaner energy that would require investment, that would require change in our way of consuming. And this would take time. And this would require that we think the two sides of the equation at the same time.
Jihad, just pulling on that string, it's it seems that before this period there was a lack of coordination on energy transition globally, where governments sort of went their own way. Do you see this changing going forward? Do you see more cooperation now on that transition period? And it would seem to me, at least, that to reconcile the gap of the lack of investment from the private sector, that governments will actually have to increase their involvement in the transition rather than decrease their involvement. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think, Amjad, exactly the way you portrayed it is what we went through over the last 2 years. The various successive shocks brought to our attention that we need to move on a multi-track approach. This multi-pronged approach would require that we preserve access to energy, and therefore investment is still needed. We gradually widen the sources of energy that we would create, and this would require additional investment into renewable energy that maybe in the beginning may not be cost effective, but with time it will. Hopefully, technology will help in that. On the other side of the equation, we saw that the behavior of consumers, be it corporate, industrial, or even households, have to adapt to that. And the latest development with the impact of the war in Ukraine on energy consumption in Europe, it's clearly showing that those are important issues to deal with. Last but not the least, the region is one of, and I would say the largest producer of energy worldwide. And there is a role here that has been played by countries of the region, and I'm sure that it will be played. I'm happy to see that several countries have developed their strategies, their medium and long term strategies, with concrete objectives in terms of reaching zero emission, zero carbon emission, by also concrete steps in diversifying their source of energy. I think those are important milestones. I hope and I wish we will see greater regional cooperation on those important issues, because I think this is where the region can be stronger and can be an important player globally. Last, I think also we collectively we need to develop new set of values where preserving our ecosystem, as well as also developing certain number of behaviors are going to be important if we want to succeed in this transition.
You know, you mentioned on several occasions that the Gulf has been a beneficiary of everything that's been happening in energy. I'm curious as to your take as to how they're investing this windfall. You know, we've had historically different ways that they've invested, and some would argue not productively. Do you see something different going on this time around with the Gulf? Are they investing wisely? How do you see that windfall being put to use?
Well, two things. One, over the last few years, we saw a move toward medium term planning, serious investment in diversification, not only diversification on the economic front, but also on the public finance front to reduce dependence on oil and gas. And those were steps in the good direction when we saw positive outcome of that. I think the challenge for those countries is to pursue this transformative journey at a time where oil price, has reached the $100 plus for the barrel. The second development we saw is their investment strategy, or the way they manage their financial resources has changed over time.
Right.
From an approach where sovereign wealth funds only played the role of diversifying their investment and reducing, I would say, the link between their economy and their investment, to something that is more complex, whereby in addition to that, we see that sovereign wealth funds are playing an important role in accelerating economic transformation, and recently in also seeking opportunities in countries in the region, where in the past it was mainly
Right.
investing in the West and targeting advanced economy and very much sophisticated sectors and companies. This is the new approach that we see now happening, linking this to their planning process that has moved from short term to medium term, hopefully will increase the value of those investments and will help gradually diversify economies and creating more opportunities for regional cooperation. Of course, this is very important to put in a context of good governance, which on one hand should not reduce the space to the private sector. And on the other hand, those are long-term resources that belong also to future generation, is to make sure that they are well invested in order to protect the value of those assets.
And Jihad, you've been a very strong proponent of gender equality and the important role that women empowerment can play to achieve sustainable growth. So, what countries are leading the process of gender equality, women empowerment in the region, and how do you think this can really help accelerating economic growth? And what other countries can learn from those?
Well, let me first say, Rasha, that we cannot succeed in inclusion if we keep 50% of the population outside the work, outside the decision making, outside the leadership. Therefore, if we want to succeed in inclusion, which is, I think, this is what many countries in the region are seeking to achieve, we need to have a very clear strategy to include further women in the economic arena and the decision-making arena. This requires, on one hand, to have a very specific policies, very specific economic and public policies. That requires also to adjust the legal and regulatory framework that is lacking in many countries, and also change practices, culture, and mentality. And it's going to be a long journey, and it's an important one. If we want to succeed, we need to do this. Public policies have been gradually, I would say, moving toward that, but I think we still have a way to go. We have several initiatives in several countries. Tunisia, Morocco, we saw in Jordan, we see in Egypt, and also in other countries, certain initiatives taking place. But still, I think women's participation is still low relatively to the skills and the talents that women have, which is in terms of input-output. It's not the right equation. We invest a lot in building capacity, but we're not putting them at use. If we compare to other parts of the world also, and also if we compare to the level of aspiration that Arab women have, I think we are still below what we want all collectively to achieve. Therefore, this is an important priority for our future. It will have huge economic benefit. Socially, it will strengthen the social protection framework and increase resilience. And especially, I think going forward, this is going to be in utmost importance if we want to reach higher level of growth and reduce the unemployment. Therefore, We saw this. And I take one simple example. Recently, Saudi introduced certain number of regulatory changes to allow women to contribute further into economic activity, and we saw very rapid response in the labor market. It helped increase women's participation and gradually reduce the level of unemployment. Those are success stories that we need to build on, but this is one of the key priorities that we need to set for the region for the next 5 to 10 years.
I'm gonna give a quick plug for our program called the Win Fellowship. So I don't know if you saw it, Jihad, but we have a program where we're trying to upskill women leaders and entrepreneurs to hopefully succeed and get to the leadership roles in the region. We've seen in other regions where women go into the leadership position, you see that permeate through the entire population. So it's very important that we add to the women in the leadership positions, both on the private sector and the public sector, of course. But Rasha, please go ahead. I think you had a follow on.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's. I was actually wondering if the IMF can sometimes put some social targets as a condition, as a conditionality aspect of your loan agreements with the governments in the region and around the world.
We actually do this, Russia, in several of our programs. For example, in Jordan, we set certain targets and conditions, in Egypt too, because it's very difficult to achieve the objective of creating job opportunities for women if you don't level the playing field. And therefore, transportation, for example, in certain cases, childcare, regulatory reforms are very important to increase the level of women's participation. Recently, we have updated the strategy, the gender strategy for the fund that has certain very specific milestones. And in our global research conference that we had once a year, we had it last time in Morocco in June, whereby one of the key issues that we discussed was around women's participation in the economy. This is an important issue. It's not only important because we believe that this is the right thing to do, but also we believe that this is the good thing to do for the economy, for social stability, as well as also to succeed in the transformation that the region needs. Therefore, yes, it's a macro critical, as we tend to say, to increase gender participation.
Jihad, when we look at entrepreneurship, it's another big pillar that we focus on. We are seeing momentum in the region, but still the numbers are fairly small. How do you view entrepreneurship in that reform mix that you're talking about? How important is it in the scheme of things? And who are some of the better, let's say, operators in terms of entrepreneurship that you're seeing emerge out of the region?
Well, entrepreneurs of today are the large corporations of tomorrow. And therefore, you cannot dissociate this from a medium to long-term growth strategy. Therefore, their role is very important, not only to create jobs, but also to build the competitiveness of your economy and to grow your economy over the medium term. What needs to be done? To provide them the right access to market and the right access to finance, which is not always the case. This requires to adjust and adapt the financing instruments for that, but also in terms of regulation to provide them the right access to market, protect their intellectual capital, and also allow them to grow and to compete. Several countries have moved in this direction. Of course, we have some success stories of some of the startups that now have reached levels of billions of dollars of capitalization. This is something that we need to see more. And I see here one avenue of strengthening collaboration between countries in the region. Because The resources are finite, and they are very much, in demand globally. The risk that we are seeing is whenever someone develops something, it's immediately attracted to go to Silicon Valley or other parts of the world. Therefore, we need to create the ecosystem for those startups to be able to grow in our market and expand, while in terms of their economic contribution, job contribution, they still contribute to the well-being of the economy of the region. Therefore, the idea is not to close our market. The idea is to open our market, but to provide the infrastructure, the ecosystem for those to grow while they are, in fact, operating in the region. And also, this is also requires that we look at the education system, at the capacity building and the skill building, that our universities need to take this as an opportunity to become more active in this journey.
I think your point about access to markets, it's such a key point from a venture capital point of view. And the reason I say that is because I think it's all connected to the lack of FDI in the region. As an investor, when you're looking at an opportunity, you want to see that it has a large market that it can grow into. And that's been a primary challenge, I think, for FDI coming into the technology sector and other entrepreneurship in the region. So there seems to be a little bit of incoherence in terms of the policies where you're trying to drive entrepreneurship on one end, but you're not opening integration and markets on the other end. Why do you think that is? And what are the biggest hurdles that we are seeing today for regional integration?
There are two dimensions. One of them is the strategic positioning. We saw countries, for example, succeeding in getting into the global value chains. Morocco is producing spare parts for aircrafts, for cars, and we saw that it helped them to weather the shock of the COVID crisis much better than maybe other countries in the region. Therefore, improving in the quality, improving the competitiveness is always positive, because it allows you not only to depend on your own market, but to benefit from the globalization. The second trend that I see that we could put at use is the onshoring. The COVID crisis and the disruption in the supply chain has brought new thinking that we need to bring production close to market and close to home. And geographically, we are very well located to serve several markets: Europe, Africa, and Asia. And therefore, there are new opportunities that we need to see. What those opportunities require is, A, to have the talents and the organization of the workforce and the capital in order to be competitive. B, for the state to provide the clarity of regulation and provide also the predictability in terms of public policy, and the capital of the region to be a risk taker and not risk averse. And this is something that we start seeing more and more. I think we have a certain number of good examples of success stories. We need to build on those and to expand them and to mainstream them.
And Jihad, let me take you back to the macro economy picture. So the level of debt distress witnessed by many countries in the region is very, very high, especially when it comes to external debt. So I'm thinking of Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan. This is putting pressure on the local currency. We've seen Egypt going into another wave of devaluation. People are talking about potentially another additional wave of devaluation of the local currency, and this is putting a lot of pressure on the market and on the consumer sort of purchasing power. So, like, how alarming is this? And do you expect any other country to follow the path that has been witnessed in Lebanon?
Well, debt is an important issue, and when debt goes up, it creates vulnerabilities. Of course, That combined with external shocks, it increases vulnerabilities usually. Therefore, it's very important, and this is what the fund has been trying to help countries at dealing with, is how to reduce level of debt and how to also reduce the impact of external shocks on the economies. You mentioned Egypt and other countries. Those are important priorities. You need to preserve what you have acquired or improved, and stability is the best way to preserve that. Therefore, maintaining macroeconomic stability is an important priority even for prosperity going forward. High level of debt in the context of increase in interest rate is an additional challenge. And this is why we are working with all the countries that you have mentioned in order to help them while accelerating consolidation to strengthen their macroeconomic stability, but also do it in a way that is socially providing the right safeguards and protection to the most vulnerable, and not affecting the competitiveness of the economies. And sometimes when you are subjected to external shock, the exchange rate has to help in maintaining your competitiveness. And also, public policies need to be taking into consideration not only the internal issues, but also the external issues. We are in a moment of high uncertainty. We're in a moment where inflation globally is very high, and those are issues that need to be dealt with. This is the purpose of our work, and this is how, in the last 3 years, we were able to provide cushion to many countries during COVID crisis with the rapid financial facilities. Last year, with the distribution of SDRs that provided liquidity. This year, with the resilience and sustainability trust helping countries to deal with the structural issues. And for others, with the programs that we provide, with Jordan, with Tunisia, with Morocco, with Egypt, we have recalibrated our programs to help those countries address a series of external shocks that affected their economies.
There's always the debate of how much external debt is too much. Like, what do you think is the alarming threshold? Is it, I don't know, 50% of GDP, 30% of GDP? Do you usually have like a sort of simulation analysis for this, and you have like in mind some indicators that should be alarming when we think of these countries that I mentioned, Egypt, Jordan, and of course Lebanon?
Well, the general answer to that is having a sustainable level of debt is the right course of action. Reducing debt gradually, reducing the burden of debt on public finance, and reducing the uncertainty that debt could bring. But I think countries are different, and this depends on the nature of the structure of the debt, how long-term the debt is, how vulnerable the debt is, if there is a change in interest rate conditions. Therefore, I think countries are different and treated on country-by-country basis. There is no one-size-fits-all. I would say is preserving macroeconomic stability, reducing the debt burden, reducing the uncertainty that the high level of debt could bring, and the risk that this could have in terms of crowding out financial resources that usually should benefit the private sector. Those are the right policies.
Do you see, we've seen Gulf players supporting economies like Pakistan and Egypt. Do you see that continuing as we go forward, or are they going to be more prudent with how they support these countries with their monetary policy?
Gulf countries have been, over the years and recently more than ever, a great supporter to countries in the region. We have had very good collaboration with them. They contributed to several countries where, for example, the fund provides programs. Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Tunisia, and other countries. This is, I would say, a welcome attitude that we saw recently increased. Saudi, when they were chairing the when they were chairing the G20, they have initiated this initiative for what we call the common framework in order to help countries address their debt. And recently, several of the countries in the region, as well as also the regional institutions, the Arab Fund for Economic and Social Development, the Arab Monetary Fund, or the Islamic Development Banks, have contributed in providing financing to countries in the region who needed to have access to long-term, cheap resources to ease their financing constraints.
I'm gonna give. Sorry, I was just gonna say I'm gonna give my wonderful co-host the last question. So please, Rasha, go ahead.
Okay, my last question is going to be very hypothetical, Jihad. If we have the authority to appoint you as the president of one of the MENA countries, first, which country would you choose? Second, what would be your immediate 5 economic decisions next day you're in power?
Look, I think one can contribute in different ways. And again, thank you for suggesting this to me. I think.
I don't think he wants the job, is what he's saying.
No, look, I think we are. Let me take it from a different angle. We are definitely in the region at one of those important crossroads. We have a huge set of issues to deal with, but also I think we are in a moment where opportunities for the region are real. What one should do for the future of the region is to set clear targets in terms of addressing one of the main issues we have, which is high level of unemployment. And policies should be geared toward achieving that, starting from education, to reforming the labor market, to improving the quality of infrastructure, and also to strengthening governance, to provide access to those who need it at a fair way. This is one important dimension. The second dimension is to reconsider our role in the world. We as a region, we have a very strong contribution to provide to the world. This would require that maybe to change our approach of regional integration and build something new, but I still consider that there is a great value of increasing the level of collaboration between countries, between people, between groups, between companies in the region. Removing barriers, tearing down walls, it's an important priority for our region. 3 is we need to address collectively the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities. We are a region that has huge potential, but also we have certain important issues. We have a very high level of internally displaced refugees that we need collectively to deal with. We need also collectively to work on reducing the level of conflict intensity that exists in the region and hijack our future. Therefore, also, we will not be able to succeed if we don't address and deal with those issues.
Well, with that, thank you, Jihad. We really appreciate you joining us today. Your comments were insightful as usual, and wanted to wish you luck with all the programs that you're working on at the IMF. Have a wonderful day. And I also like to thank my co-host, Rasha, as well. And of course, our sponsor, UPS. Thank you for being a supporter, and we appreciate all the work you're doing in the Middle East as well. Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to EmpowerMe Conversations and rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. For updates on our work, follow us on LinkedIn and at AC Mideast on Twitter, or visit AtlanticCouncil.org.